Chris Jericho is washed. But how did we go from Jericho being in the top billing match for New Japan Pro Wrestling to being the first AEW World Champion to being on Ring of Honor as the World Champion in 2025? Well, in this video, we're going to explore the rise and fall of Chris Jericho in AEW. But first, let's do a recap of how Chris Jericho's last WWE run went and why he even left in the first place. Despite Jericho being less of a full-time guy in 2016, he was still a very prominent figure in the company, ending up in one of the best angles with Kevin Owens. When he was there, he'd be on the shows quite frequently, unlike some other wrestlers that only come in every now and then, but you know. Things would change when Jericho would fight former best friend Kevin Owens at WrestleMania 33. What ticked off Jericho was that this angle that went on for months and dominated Raw would play second fiddle to Bill Goldberg and Brock Lesnar. This decision would cause Jericho to decide to wrestle elsewhere, and on November 5th, 2017, Chris Jericho would go back to New Japan Pro Wrestling for the first time since the freaking 90s and announce that he's fighting Kenny Omega at WrestleMania. He's fighting Kenny Omega at Wrestle Kingdom. Alpha versus Omega. Some might not remember, but this was a huge freaking deal. Alright, New Japan Pro Wrestling was gaining momentum in recent years as an alternative to the current dog shit state of WWE. So a legend in Chris Jericho, who could have been there for life, jumping ship to a different promotion was massive for New Japan Pro Wrestling, and it became one of the biggest things in wrestling at the time. With how bland WWE was at the time, this was a really cool moment in the business that kind of gave it a shot in the arm. So 2018 rolls around and it's Wrestle Kingdom, Jericho versus Omega. Omega was one of the best in the world, and Jericho wanted to prove something that he could actually do something different. Both men would put on a 30-minute classic banger match, but in the end, Omega would pick up the win against Alpha. Despite losing, this was a massive success for Jericho and New Japan Pro Wrestling especially. Jericho would return to New Japan and would enter into a feud with Tetsuya Naito, the IWGP Intercontinental Champion. Before Wrestle Kingdom 13, another event was going to be held that would change the business forever. All In 2018. A gamble by the Elite to see if they could sell at a 10,000 seat arena because Dave Meltzer said they couldn't. So the one good thing that Dave Meltzer has contributed to the wrestling business is the fact that he was the catalyst for all AEW. So thanks, Dave. Jericho would appear at the event and attack Kenny Omega because he hates him. And this would set up a match at Jericho's cruise event, you know, in a show where on a cruise ship, you know, cool. It ended up being pretty successful for Chris Jericho, and Jericho would end up winning the IWGP IC title and would defend the belt at Wrestle Kingdom 13 against Tetsuya Naito when he lost and put him over. But with the success of indie wrestling in 2018, a domino effect would occur with the creation of All Elite Wrestling. On January 8th, 2019, AEW would be announced as the new promotion and would end up with Chris Jericho announcing he is the first real major signing of the company. This was during the time when WWE was putting on some of its worst television ever. It's television so bad it makes children cry. At least, I think it did. At the first ever AEW pay-per-view, Double or Nothing, Chris Jericho would defeat Adam Hangman Page to become the first AEW World Champion, and in the fall of that year, AEW would make its television debut as its first episode of Dynamite. On this episode, Jericho would form a new faction called the Inner Circle, and with Jericho as champion, they'd be the top heel group on AEW TV. Now, I do want to point out that during this time, I do think Chris Jericho was still doing great work, and him as a champion established the credibility of AEW as a major promotion. I mean, he's a legend, you know, he's been multiple time world champion. It made sense to give him the belt. So I'm not dogging them on that. Jericho retained the title at Full Gear against Cody Rhodes, which led to Cody Rhodes never being allowed to challenge for the World Championship again. That was a terrible, awful, dumb decision. I don't know why they did that, but it was stupid. Then Jericho tried to get Jon Moxley to join the Inner Circle, which didn't work out, and they'd fight at Revolution where Mox would become the AEW World Champion. The Inner Circle would move on to fighting the Elite. God damn it. And then the pandemic would hit. Oh god. Oh no. The pandemic shut everything down. And while it wouldn't shut down the storyline or anything, it did change some plans. Such as the Stadium Stampede match into the one that we actually got, which was like a chaotic brawl in an empty arena. I know, this was a dark time for wrestling, guys. This was terrible. Not only dark time for wrestling, just dark time for the world. Like, it sucked. After that ended, Jericho moved into feuding with Orange Cassidy, who they really wanted to get over and are still trying to make him into a star 5 years after this company's birth. Jericho in the end put him over in a Mimosa Mayhem match where Jericho got dumped into a pat of orange juice, which honestly, the orange juice was less orange than him. I mean, look at him. Look how orange he is. Jesus. After this is where MJF got involved in Jericho's little world. Yeah, the MJF feud with Chris Jericho. A feud that, in my opinion, was peak Jericho in AEW. It started when MJF tried to join the Inner Circle, and he'd eventually get into the faction where we got one of AEW's greatest segments. Just awesome musical-esque thing. Fantastic television. I loved it. And these two just worked so well together. I really liked this shit. You know, it was really fun. And they built this entire relationship up for months, giving us really good television. And then MJF would turn on the group by starting his own faction, The Pinnacle, which kind of fizzled out, but still, great turn, great television, good feud. Unfortunately, this kind of fizzled out as time went on. They had Blood and Guts and Stadium Stampede, which were fun matches, minus, you know, the really bad shot of Jericho landing on, like, foam. It just wasn't the same after the turn, even though I still thought it was fine. It just didn't feel as like, good or impactful. And the feud went on until Jericho had to do the labors of Jericho, beating hand-picked opponents of MJF to prove that Jericho still had it. Hardcore matches, technical matches, high-flying. Jericho passed all of them to fight MJF, where he lost again. But they did get one more match out of this with Jericho's career on the line, and as we all know, Chris Jericho is not going to retire, so yeah, he won. But overall, the feud was good, and it established MJF as a top guy in the company, which was necessary. Well, so what's next for Jericho? Well, he ended up going against Ethan Page and Scorpio Sky, along with Dan Lambert. I don't even remember this happening at all. I don't even remember it. So I'm just going to skip this because who cares about these guys? Jericho's next AEW arc is the Jericho Appreciation Society, or I'll be calling them JAS. He loses at Revolution to Eddie Kingston, and Jericho turned heel again by killing off the Inner Circle and making the JAS. Was this necessary? Not really, but hey, you know, we needed Chris Jericho. We needed heel Jericho, because that's what he's great at, right? Right? The Jericho Appreciation Society then went after the Blackpool Combat Club, and it led to Anarchy in the Arena, which was a fun match, but I don't remember much that actually happened during this feud. At Grand Slam in 2022, Jericho would shock the world by winning the Ring of Honor World title from Claudio Castagnoli, and this moment right here, was the moment that Jericho started to fall off, in my opinion. A 50-plus-year-old Chris Jericho winning the Ring of Honor, which I get has fallen off harder than Jericho. ROH is supposed to be about wrestling, damn it, and you give 50-year-old Chris Jericho your world championship. To me, this is when he started to decline and just kind of fall off, because just like, really, bro? You really need to... Yeah, sorry Dalton Castle, you're not going to be Ring of Honor champion. We got to give it to Chris Jericho, baby. And then Jericho lost the Ring of Honor World title to Claudio at Final Battle, and then the JAS dies. Why? Well, apparently Don Callis became friends with Jericho, and the JAS was like, nah fam, we don't mess with him, screw that guy. So yeah, they all just like left. And Jericho would go on to lose to Will Ospreay at All In, and would fight Sammy Guevara at Grand Slam, only for Sammy Guevara to turn on him, kind of very similarly to 2003 at WrestleMania 19. Wait a minute, I thought I just said that they hated Don Callis. Now he's joining them? This doesn't make any sense. With the odds looking grim for Jericho getting beat up by these guys every week, a hero steps up to the plate to save him. Kenny Omega. Yeah. Former opponents that started this whole domino effect to make AEW a reality now are teaming up when their stocks have fallen, which I hate to say about Kenny Omega, but yeah, ever since he lost the world title, he's kind of been going down and down, and it's not as bad as Jericho, but you know. Anyways, the Golden Jets were born, and they'd end up losing. Interesting. But don't worry, they got a title shot against the Young Bucks, and they won. Yeah, God. Jericho and Omega versus the Young Bucks. God, man, that sounds awful. Unfortunately, this story with Jericho and Omega got canned after Omega got diverticulitis. So now Jericho has no friends until he saves Sammy Guevara from a beat up, and they're back together. You know, after like 2 months of breaking up. What was the point of this other than to like waste people's time or try to pivot to something else because Kenny Omega's injured? And finally, after 6 months of stupidity and just boredom, Jericho loses to Konosuke Takeshita on pay-per-view to end the Don Callis arc. And Jericho revives the Lionheart persona for the 3rd time. I forgot to mention that in this video. Jericho's been like reviving the Lionheart persona multiple times in AEW, and this is like the 3rd time. Listen, if you have to revive your old gimmick from the 1990s multiple times in 2024, maybe you've run out of ideas, brother, and maybe you should call it quits. But now we get to the point where Jericho goes from meh to get the hell off my television. The learning tree. This is where Jericho's fall from grace really manifested itself, as they gave him the FTW title over the young and up-and-coming star Hook. Yeah, the 20-something-year-old Hook. They decide to have him job out to Chris Jericho. I guarantee this is how it went. Oh, hey Tony, I'm here. What's going on? Hey Hook, we're gonna have you lose to Chris Jericho on pay-per-view, and you're gonna lose your title too. Are you serious? Yeah, I mean, it's Chris Jericho. Who doesn't love Chris Jericho? At this point, this meme is of Jericho being like Hulk Hogan is starting to become more and more based in reality, and it's actually getting kind of scary, to be honest. After holding the championship for 3 to 4 months, yes, 3 to 4 months of Chris Jericho at his worst gimmick ever being a champion, he dropped the belt back to Hook at All In, where he retired it for good. So now that gets us to today, actually. It's, as of this recording, it's like November, and this was like in August, so Jericho's just been, unfortunately, still doing the learning tree shit. Just awful. What is Chris Jericho doing now at the time of this recording? Well, he's fighting Tomohiro Ishii, a guy who's nearing 50. I don't hate Tomohiro Ishii, but like, come on, bro. One of AEW's main feuds on Dynamite Weekly is between 2 men that have the combined age of 102. This almost is like as bad as Goldberg versus The Undertaker, except the difference is that at least one of them didn't die. Hey, it's March of 2025 as of this recording. So, what is Chris Jericho doing now? Well, he won the Ring of Honor World Championship back. And he's still champion since October 23rd of last year. And he's just been relegated to Ring of Honor Hell, which Ring of Honor is in its own diabolically bad state. But I guess the only saving grace is that he hasn't been on Dynamite recently. Instead, we've been getting the Death Riders and Cope, who's been obliterating them one by one. So I guess Cope is now taking Jericho's spot. So yay! Jericho's still Ring of Honor World Champion. He's fighting Bandito every week. So there you go. That's the recent update on Chris Jericho. So that's where I will leave this off. Can Chris Jericho bounce back and become better and more relevant and more entertaining on television? No, not really. Look, Chris Jericho's nearing retirement, I think, I hope, and I don't think that there's much that will change about him. He's just an old man trying to hold on to the glory days as long as he can. And it's just an insane fall off for a legend in the industry, man. Like, Chris Jericho is just an all-time legend. He's like one of the greats. Going from the Alpha versus Omega thing in New Japan to the great feud between him and MJF and to the learning tree is an insane fall off, like crazy fall off. It's kind of interesting that Jericho's fall off coincides with AEW's decline and WWE's big boom period. Like, Jericho started to get really bad, like started to fall off in 2022, which is coincidentally when the Punk shit happened. So it is kind of funny. The only difference is that while AEW has the potential to come back and be great again, Chris Jericho is basically cooked at this point, and the less of him we see, the better. So yeah, Jericho, you're a legend, but please just go away. At least for like 6 months. And let's get Ricky Starks back on television, who still isn't being used. One more update on Chris Jericho. He's gone. He actually left AEW, at least for now. So everything's cool now, guys. Until he comes back and tries to ruin television again. Okay, bye, for real.